And to return to your question, I think that it's the same question as the question of transmission, in fact. In one sense, philosophy is an example of purely individual construction. It's really a sequence of proper names, Plato, Aristotle. It's like artists, finally. There is some great philosophical systems with their creator, with proper name and so on. And in another sense, philosophy is clearly in relationship to big institutions, German university with Hegel and so on, and today also department of philosophy in university and so on. So there is a tension, I think, inside the development of philosophy between a definition of philosophy which would be of artistic nature. There exist some great creators of philosophy, the big tradition from Plato to today, and another definition which is that philosophy is something like a collective and institutional process with organized transmission in the classical form of the discourse of université, to speak as Lacan. Because Lacan explained what is exactly the discourse of université. And I think that it's because philosophy, as a thinking, hesitates between artistic language and mathematical language, in fact, from the very beginning. From the very beginning. We are to, during the Greek sequence, all the philosophers before Plato was poets, in fact. Parmenides, Heraclitus, and so on. And after that, there are also Lucrece and so on. And there are in Plato itself some passages, myths, and so on, which are of clearly something in the poetical language. And so there is one side of philosophy which is of artistic nature, literature, poetry, and so on. And there is another side which is of under the idea of the matheme, under the question of formalization. And you know, in ethics of Spinoza, demonstration, axioms, theorems, and so on. So we have two completely different paradigms of the language of philosophy. And so there is something like an impurity, a fundamental impurity of philosophy, the language of philosophy. It's not an unified language, not at all. It's something very complex, which hesitates between literature on one side, mathematics on the other side, something like that, and which goes between the two, sometimes on one side, sometimes on the other side. Is there something in common in the language of Wittgenstein, of the language of Nietzsche, the language of Spinoza, the language of Plato? You know, it's a very strong story, the story of philosophical language, absolutely unstable. And so it's the same contradiction that we find in the question of relationship between the individual creation of philosophical systems and schools of philosophy, university, institutions, and so on. And there is the idea of a philosophical genius on one side, and on the other side, philosophical rules of transmission, collective debates, collective creations, and so on. For example, today, in the general scope of analytic philosophy, the dominant idea is that philosophy is a collective acceptation of some rules of rationality and so on and so on with logical paradigms. And so I have heard some analytical professor saying that the only thing which is very important in philosophy are the papers of the last 10 years. They were absolutely without reason to read something old and completely false like Plato, Aristotle, or Kant. And it's a tendency, it's a possible tendency of philosophy. I name that the scholastic tendency. I think it was the same thing in the medieval sequence of philosophy. We can discuss a very limited problem collectively, and it's the same problem in artificial language, Latin, for example. And people, on the other side, we have a completely different idea, where philosopher is something alone, like a great artist, maybe something mad, like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, not so good, and so on. And we cannot resolve this contradiction. There is no philosophy is that sort of contradiction itself. You have in the scope of philosophy different things which are not really unified. And the language itself is not unified. And so philosophy is always possible to say that philosophy in some sense does not exist. You can say something like that. Why? Because it's not an unified language, it's not an unified institution, it's not a sequence of great creators which have something in common, because between Heidegger and Descartes, Heidegger and Wittgenstein and so on, there is so big differences. But precisely, if philosophy is a thinking which realizes different manners to localize the void, it's normal that we have that sort of situation which is not unified. And so, because between two philosophers, there is the difference between two different localizations of the void. That is why there is institutional part of philosophy. There is also something of the philosophy which is not at all institutional. In France, the situation has been from the very beginning the war between the two. Descartes against the Sorbonne was the beginning of the French philosophy. And today it's exactly the same thing. Many great philosophers, French, were not at all in relationship to university. It's not the same case in Germany, but in France, Rousseau, Diderot, Voltaire, Auguste Comte, Sartre, and so on, are not in universities.
Ça va?
Oh, ça va. Ça peut aller.
Okay. I think we should thank Professor Badiou.